Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Now unfortunately I have not been able to upload a video on this channel in a long time, and in that time 3 episodes of the new series The Bad Batch have come out, and these 3 episodes include the pilot episode of the series, Cut and Run, which is the second episode of the series, and the 3rd episode, which I believe is called The Replacements. So in this video, to kind of catch up on everything I've missed, I will be reviewing those 3 episodes in a semi-brief fashion, and hopefully from now on, I will be able to review each episode as they come out. So just a quick note to everyone, this video will contain spoilers for the first 3 episodes of the Bad Batch series, and yeah, let's just jump into the review. So the first episode I will be reviewing is the first episode of the series, and I gotta be honest, I really liked this episode. It was by far better than all the other episodes that have come out so far, and yeah, I just really liked it. It was really good from like beginning to end of the episode. It was like phenomenal. Like the intro, simply the intro to the episode was super well done. I thought it was interesting how this episode started so similar to how the Clone Wars episodes start. You know how they start with like Admiral Yularen giving context for what's like been happening in the galaxy. Yeah, this episode started with like the exact same intro that you'd expect from like a Clone Wars episode, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that, because on the one hand, having this show open to a similar manner that like Clone Wars episodes would open to, it's a great way to like connect the 2 series. However, on the other hand, opening this show exactly how a Clone Wars episode would start kind of makes this episode, the pilot episode for the series, it kind of makes it feel like just another Clone Wars episode. Those are my 2 thoughts on it there. Like, there's a good side to it and there's a bad side to it. However, I did really like what they did with the intro, you know, where like you can see like scenes from Revenge of the Sith remade in like Clone Wars animation. I thought that was so cool, and I really liked how they reused that really cool looking Grievous model that we got to see a little bit of in the Siege of Mandalore arc. I'm really glad that they reused that model again for the intro, because I think that model looks super cool, so I'm really glad we got to see just a few more frames of it in this intro. But other than just the first few seconds, the opening part of this episode in general was really good, and I really like how they started this show with Order 66. I thought that was a nice touch, and I really like how they brought Caleb Doom back from Star Wars Rebels, and we get to see him as like a Padawan, and we get to see him experience Order 66, and I really liked how they tied the Bad Batch to Caleb Doom, and that's a great way of connecting the Bad Batch TV show to Star Wars Rebels. Kind of like how, like I said, the intro of this episode tied a lot to the Clone Wars, because, you know, the intro is exactly what an intro would be like from the Clone Wars series. I'm really glad they got Caleb Doom from Star Wars Rebels and made him a Padawan and put him in the opening part of this episode too, because that's a great way of tying it to Star Wars Rebels. So now it feels like this show is connected to all parts of the Star Wars TV show universe. And yeah, I thought that was really great. It was super emotional too, like when Caleb's master dies. That was pretty cool. Let's move past the opening part of the episode. I really liked it, but there's a lot more to talk about in this episode, so yeah, let's just move right along. So let's talk about the Bad Batch group itself. Starting with this episode, I actually started to like the Bad Batch. Like, when they first appeared in that Clone Wars arc, like, I was okay with them, like, I didn't hate them, but, you know, like, I didn't really care much for them anyways. I thought their, like, character traits were a little too extreme for me, because, you know, there's the stereotypical strong but dumb character, there's the stereotypical smart guy, stereotypical emo, stereotypical leader. Like, the Bad Batch was basically just a bunch of stereotype characters when they were first introduced in, like, that Clone Wars arc. And, you know, it wasn't terrible. They weren't bad. It was just a little too stereotypical for me. And in this episode, and all the episodes so far, they are still the same characters, right? Like, they still have the same over-the-top stereotypical personalities. However, now that I've actually been introduced to them through that Clone Wars arc, I've grown to like their personalities, and it doesn't bother me as much because I've gotten more used to it. Yeah, like I said, I can start to like their personalities now that I'm used to it. Yeah, that's just something I thought was worth noting. And let's not forget the newest member of the Bad Batch crew, Omega, who I don't really think becomes an official member of the Bad Batch crew until later episodes. However, she is still a Bad Batch member, so we're just gonna talk about her real quick. And in this episode, she was not nearly as annoying as I thought she would be. Like, when I watched the trailer, I thought she was gonna be super annoying. I thought she was gonna be the stereotypical, like, annoying little bratty kid that the heroes have to save all the time because she's a child, so they're obligated to save her. I thought she was gonna be like, useless and just annoying, but she was not that. She's actually pretty helpful to the crew, and she's not like overly useful that like she seems like an adult. Like, she still seems like a kid, but she's not completely useless. And another thing that probably is what makes her more likable is the voice acting. I don't really know who voice acts her. I probably should have looked that up, but whoever voice acts Omega is doing a really great job at, making her not annoying. So yes, that is really good. Enough about Omega. She's a lot more likable than I thought she would be, but enough about her. Let's move on to some of the other characters in this episode. When Admiral Tarkin shows up in this episode, he absolutely steals the stage. He's super intimidating, and like everything he does is like makes sense, and it's like for the Empire. I really love how loyal he is to the Empire. It's really cool, and he's like the same guy you remember from the Citadel arc from the Clone Wars and from Episode 4, but like he's still just that guy, but they just like absolutely like made him so much more himself, basically, and it was super cool. So now let's stop talking about the characters and let's talk about the music. The music in this episode was really good, and like there's a lot of different soundtracks in this episode, and it just sets the atmosphere so well. The music does. The music is just so good, and I really liked how, unlike The Mandalorian, this show has a lot of different like soundtracks in it. Because in The Mandalorian, I noticed like most of the music in that show is literally just the Mandalorian theme that they play over and over and over and over again, sometimes with like different styles. But this episode has a lot of different songs it plays, so that was really great. One final thing I want to mention about this episode is Crosshair turning evil. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about the characters in this episode anymore, but this is more story-based, so I just want to talk about it real quick. When Crosshair turned evil, I thought that was a really great idea, because at this point in the Empire, there is no one really that can stand up to the Bad Batch and be threatening to them. Like I mentioned, Admiral Tarkin was threatening, but like he's not gonna beat the Bad Batch in that firefight. So it makes sense that they would make Crosshair evil, so that way he could like stand up to the Bad Batch in a fight. Because the only other person that could like stand up to the Bad Batch at this point in the Empire's life would be Vader, or I guess Palpatine. And either one of those people would absolutely destroy the Bad Batch. So I really like how they made Crosshair evil, because, now he can, be threatening to the Bad Batch, but not be too powerful, but not be too weak either. He's a good nemesis for them to fight. Also, he has good connections to the Bad Batch because, he used to be one of them, so it makes sense. However, I don't like how the reason Crosshair turned bad was because of his inhibitor chip. I thought it would have been super cool if Crosshair genuinely was loyal to the Empire and like genuinely like thought like, serving the Empire was the right thing to do. And then that would have been like a really interesting dynamic where like he has a different philosophy from the Bad Batch, and like he thinks the Empire is like actually like the right like thing to follow, and then like the rest of the Bad Batch doesn't like the Empire, but he does, and then that like be cool to see him like actually be loyal to the Empire. It's kind of annoying how like the reason he's bad is because of his inhibitor chip and he doesn't have a choice. I thought it would have been cool if like he chose to be loyal to the Empire. That would have made it like 10 times more awesome when he turns away from them. But the way it is now, it's fine. Like I said before, I'm really glad Crosshair turned away from the Bad Batch, because it makes perfect sense, and now the Bad Batch has a formidable foe. But I just don't really like how he turned away. Like, it's because of like the inhibitor chip. It's fine, but I just think it would have been so much cooler if he like genuinely wanted to like break off from the Bad Batch and he genuinely was loyal to the Empire. That would have been really cool. Also, the thing where they intensify the programming in Crosshair's chip was super cheesy. Like, there's like these weird like purple like energy things going inside Crosshair's brain, intensifying the programming of his chip. What does that even mean, intensify the programming? Like programming is just a bunch of zeros and ones. Like, intensify the zeros and ones, what does that mean? I guess I don't know anything about programming, so maybe it makes sense. I don't know. It was kind of a cheesy scene. It was fine. It wasn't like too cheesy. It wasn't Caravan of Courage cheesy, but it wasn't, it wasn't the best thing ever. But overall, I do like that Crosshair is bad now. I just don't like how he turned bad. That's all. So yeah, that's all I really have to say for now about the first episode of The Bad Batch. There is a lot more I could talk about, but this video is already way too long. So let's move on to the next episode, which is called Cut and Run. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really like this episode. Like, it was fine. It was just way too filler. And the sad thing is, this is a very filler episode. Like, you could cut this episode out and it would change, like, nothing at all. Like, I guess Hunter learns a lesson about taking care of Omega, but, like, other than that, this episode's pretty much pointless. And the sad thing is, this is only the second episode in the whole series, and it's already a filler episode. That's kind of sad. I don't know, the next episode after this one is a lot better, but this one's not that great. So yeah, let's just jump right into the review. This will probably be very brief because I don't really have much to say about this episode, so I'll just talk about the most important stuff, and then we can move on to the third episode and review that one too. The first thing I feel like I should mention is that this episode feels like a natural continuation from the first episode, because, you know, at the end of the first episode, the Bad Batch is on the run, and, you know, they're trying to, like, avoid the Empire. And this episode, you know, obviously this episode picks up where that one left off. They, you know, they go to Cut LaQuaine. And I just think it makes sense because, you know, they hide with Cut LaQuaine, who is, like, also a deserter. So it makes sense that they meet up with him because he's another deserter. And I think meeting Cut LaQuaine was really good because he's a clone that, like, has children. And now the Bad Batch have Omega, who's a child, and they have to deal with her. So it makes sense. And then that kind of ties into the lesson Hunter learns at the end of the episode about taking care of Omega. And yeah, so I think it just makes sense that this episode comes next in the series. It's not like that, like I said, it's not that good of an episode, but it makes sense. And yeah, and then in this episode, Omega does a lot of things that should annoy me, but what she does actually doesn't annoy me that much, because I mentioned this before, but the voice acting for her is super good. So when she does something that should annoy me, it just doesn't, because the voice acting is super good, and just the general context makes everything she does feel supernatural. So yeah, she's remaining consistently decent. So yeah, that's good. So the final thing I feel like I should mention about this episode, yeah, like I said, I have like almost nothing to say about this episode. The final thing I think I should say is that when Omega was going to leave with Cut LaQuaine, I actually thought that she might leave with him. Like, I genuinely thought the writers might make her leave with him, because it made so much sense to make her leave with him. But like, then logic kicked in and I was like, no, she's not gonna leave. And then of course she didn't end up leaving with them because of course the writers can't get rid of her because she's important or whatever. She's gonna be pretty important, so it makes sense that they didn't get rid of her. But dude, I genuinely thought that she might leave with Cut LaQuaine because it just made so much sense. And yeah, it made perfect sense for her to leave with him. But then of course she ran back to the Bad Batch and ended up, you know, staying with them, which I don't know. Like, it's fine that she ends up staying with them, because obviously they can't get rid of her. But I'm just gonna give them credit because I genuinely thought that she was gonna leave with Cut LaQuaine, and like, I am not usually that gullible with stuff. So yeah, the writers get credit for, you know, making me actually fall for that. So yeah. That's all I really have to say about this episode. Moving on to the next episode, which is significantly better than this one. Not as good as the first episode, but the third episode, which I believe is called The Replacements, that episode is, like, a lot better than this one. So, yeah, let's just jump right into reviewing that one. Okay, so the first thing I noticed when watching this episode was that there was a lot of exposition at the beginning of this episode. Like, characters are just saying stuff to each other that the characters should already know, but they're just saying it so that the audience can know it. But it just feels so awkward because they're saying it to each other, but like, wouldn't they both already know that information? And it just feels so, like, forced. Like, the first episode, and I'm pretty sure Cut and Run, I'm pretty sure both those episodes had this problem too, but it becomes really obvious in this episode when there's, like, exposition dumping for, like, the first, like, 5 minutes of the episode. It's not great. Like I said, the first two episodes have this problem too, but it becomes really obvious in this episode. And one of the things the Bad Batch crew talks about is Crosshair, and Omega brings up that, you know, him leaving wasn't his fault, that he was forced to do it by the chip. And then there's a bit of foreshadowing that, you know, the crew might, like, take out or deactivate Crosshair's chip by the end of the series, which, yeah, it's pretty obvious that, like, in the season finale, Crosshair's gonna get his chip taken out, and then he'll, like, turn on the Empire or something, and it'll be this big moment or whatever. This is one of the reasons why I think Crosshair should be genuinely loyal to the Empire, because then he can't have his chip taken out, which makes him more threatening, you know, because with this episode, they kind of talk about how they might, like, take his chip out, and that'll make him, like, good again, or whatever. But, like, if he was genuinely loyal to the Empire, that wouldn't work, and that would make him more threatening as an antagonist, and I just think that would make him more cool if he was genuinely mainly a bad guy. But whatever. Yeah, they foreshadow that they might end up taking his chip out by the end of the series. That's obviously gonna happen. Like, I'm willing to bet money that in the season finale of this series, they're gonna end up, like, taking Crosshair's chip out, and that'll be, like, the big climactic moment of the season, or whatever. I don't, like, that's obviously pretty predictable, so I hope that's not what happens, because it's really predictable after this episode, but yeah, so that's just what I have to say. Alright, so let's move on. This episode introduces a new character who is an Imperial officer who I believe is named Rampart, and he's pretty good. He doesn't have the same, threatening presence that Tarkin has, obviously, but I really like this new character. I feel like he's going to be a recurring villain because he seems pretty important. He introduces the idea of, like, having clones and hired soldiers work together in combat, which is pretty interesting. I wonder how that, like, concept is gonna, like, flesh out through the rest of the series, which is another thing I want to point out. This series, and particularly this episode, have done a really good job so far of explaining, like, what happens to the clones after Order 66, because I always wonder that, like, did they, like, right after Order 66, did the Empire immediately start hiring people and just, like, fire all the clones? Like, that seems a little too extreme. I think the Rampart's idea of, like, having some clones and some, like, hired guns work together is a good way of transitioning from Revenge of the Sith, all clones, to A New Hope, all hired people. So, yeah, I just thought that was a really good piece of world building they added there. Rampart introduces these new elite soldiers that he hired, and I really like how this episode tried to give each of those soldiers a bit of a personality. Like, they only have a couple of talking scenes, but in their talking scenes, I can tell that the episode was really trying to make these new, like, elite soldiers have actual personalities, and I really like that because these, like, new elite soldiers are probably going to be, like, big threats for the Bad Batch crew. So it's nice that they're actually going to have personalities instead of just being blank slates. So yeah, that was a nice touch. Now let's talk about the plotline the Bad Batch follows in this episode. And it was pretty filler, to be honest. Like, so the Bad Batch crash lands on this moon, and then there's, like, an evil monster that steals their power source or whatever. And then Omega and Hunter go and stop him. Omega saves the day. Yay. It's pretty filler. It's not terrible. It fleshes out Omega really well, and I liked that. Like, it's just pretty filler. Like, the monster is kind of random. He comes out of nowhere. The only real reason I was engaged in the Bad Batch stuff at all in this episode was because of the exceptional editing. Like, I don't really know much about editing at all, but I can tell you that the editing in all the scenes with the Bad Batch in this episode were really good. I did like how Omega saved Hunter's life, though, because it makes her actually useful. And like I said earlier, it's a good thing when she actually has a purpose. So, yeah, I'm really glad that Omega was able to save Hunter's life and save a member of the Bad Batch crew, because, it makes her seem useful. So, yeah, that was also a nice touch that this episode had. But yeah, all the stuff with the Empire and the new elite soldiers was definitely the highlight of this episode. That was super interesting, and it's the main reason I think this episode is better than the cut and run episode, because all the plot lines with the Empire so far have been really engaging and really interesting. I don't know, like, the Bad Batch plotline so far, like, other than the first episode, like, episodes 2 and 3, the Bad Batch is of pretty little consequence what they're doing, and what the Empire does is, like, what's actually interesting. So, I wonder how that's going to develop throughout the rest of the series. And, yeah, so the Empire is definitely a lot more interesting than the Bad Batches in this episode, and I really like the new elite troopers they introduce. And yeah, and the final thing worth noting that happens in this episode is when the Kaminoans talk about this new cloning project that they have that should help them keep in touch with the Empire. I don't really know anything about that, which I think is the point. I think it's meant to be mysterious, because, yeah, but they talk about this new, like, secret project they have that the Kaminoans are working on, and I'm actually really interested to see what that project is. And yeah, I'm engaged. I want to see what that project they're talking about is. I don't really have anything else to say because I don't know what the project is. But yeah, they talk about this, like, secret project that should help them keep in touch with the Empire, or, like, keep in good hands with the Empire. So that I'm really interested to see how that is gonna, turn out through the rest of the series. And yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say about all 3 of these episodes. If I were to put them in a list, the first episode would definitely be the best one. The third episode would be a little worse than the first one, but, still pretty good. And the worst episode out of these three is easily Cut and Run. It's not bad. Cut and Run's just way too filler for me. That's all. And some of you might be wondering why I didn't use a tier list for these episodes like I did for the Mandalorian episodes. And the reason I didn't use a tier list when ranking these episodes is because with the Mandalorian episodes, I was reviewing the ones from season 2, so I already knew what like the standard for quality was for that series. But for the Bad Batch, I don't really know like what the standard for quality is for the series yet, because the series is still so new. So I don't know what's considered good or bad by the series standard. So I don't know. I just didn't really feel like using a tier list. Yeah, I think that wraps up everything I needed to say. So far, yeah, the 3 episodes. Really good. They're really good. I know I talked about some negative sides to them, but overall, they're still really good episodes. Like, I was engaged in all of them. Even Cut and Run, which is like filler, I was still engaged in it. I feel like I should mention this. This series is super engaging just in general. Like, just like the animation style and the editing just makes it super engaging overall, even for less entertaining episodes like Cut and Run. It's still engaging because of the exceptional editing and animation, which I feel like I should mention the animation. The animation for this series is super good. It's basically like Clone Wars animation. Like, the animation for the series is basically the Clone Wars animation, just more extreme. Like all the characters have sharper edges, and this series just just does more of the same. Yeah, the animation for this series does more of the same for what the Clone Wars animation style was. So, yeah, it's just more of the same animation-wise compared to the Clone Wars. And, yeah, the overall good animation, good 3 episodes. This was a good trilogy of episodes, I should call them. It's a trilogy, yeah. Yeah, so overall, pretty good. I cannot wait to see where the next episode goes. Hopefully for the next episode of the series, I can review it when it comes out instead of waiting until more episodes come out and then reviewing all those episodes in one video like I did for these episodes. Hopefully that doesn't have to happen again. But yeah, so overall, these were really good episodes, and I'm honestly really excited to see where the rest of the series goes. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else left to say, so I guess just like and subscribe, and I will hopefully see you in the next video.